Hello and welcome to the 7th episode of At the Table with TikTok. And today our discussion is going to be all about being black in the workplace with a focus on the impact of using the correct terminology so people feel comfortable where they're working. I am your host, Shantae Joseph, and I am joined by an incredible panel of professionals who are going to be driving the discussion today. Firstly, we have Trevor Johnson, the Global Business Marketing Director at TikTok, Busi N, the EMEA and D&I lead at Google, Ria Laurent Hughes, a Global Privacy Project Manager at Cognizant, and Pascal Acaronye, the Systems Manager at Arsenal FC. Thank you so much for joining me, guys. I'm really excited for this conversation. So it is Black History Month, so naturally I have to start with a question. Why do you think it's important to celebrate culturally significant events such as Black History Month at work? And I'm going to start with you, Trevor, because you're right next to me.
Thank you. I'm going to answer the question why we should be celebrating Black History Month this year.
Right.
So 2020 has been a year, right? If you think about the Black Lives Matter movement, we think about George Floyd, we think about COVID. It's been an extremely hard year on our community. We have seen new voices come out and protest and be outraged about some of the things that we know have been happening to our community for a while. And that's been great. But what I've felt over the last few months is just some apathy kicking into that, right? And still the same old stories that are coming out, the same old narrative. What Black History Month is trying to do, what we're trying to do this year, is to try and change that narrative, right? To try and showcase the normality of being black. So yes, we're going to have some stars and some creators, but actually showcasing professors and doctors and business people to try and normalise the fact that the black people are normal people. That it's not just the narrative that we've seen, which has been about extremes, which has been about violence, which has been about all the negative things that we've seen. So when you talk about celebration, we want Black History Month to be a celebration this year, to really move through this year, come to a point where we are telling a new story, an uplifting story, telling black stories. And I think that's why it's really important, because we need to normalise the black story beyond the extremes and the negativity that we've seen this year and previous years. Yeah. And that's why I think it's really, really important this year, more than ever, that we're celebrating Black History Month, and why brands and companies need to be doing the same thing.
Yeah, agreed. And Pascal, obviously football has had a huge impact on the whole conversation we've had around Black Lives Matter. So why is it kind of important for Black History Month to be celebrated amongst football clubs such as Arsenal? Well,
you have to think about football. It's a reflection of society. So when you go into clubs such as Arsenal, it's got a diverse fan base, predominantly a black fan base as well, especially in London. So for me, I think Black History Month is a good opportunity to not just push forward what Trevor was saying, push forward black history, what's happened throughout the years, but also to drive the change. And what better way to do it than in a football environment where society is reflected in society by the players and the staff at hand as well. So yeah, that's pretty much it for football in terms of football field.
Yeah, I love that. And Busi, obviously at Google and at YouTube, you have so many incredible black creators and also black staff. So why is it important for you to celebrate it where you are?
Well, when we look at Google's mission, obviously to make the world's information accessible, the people that actually develop the products need to be aware of the contribution of black people. And I think it's very important. If we look at education, black history is literally next to nothing. But if we are going to be producing those tools, those products for the world, we need to actually look at, from a diverse point of view, actually acknowledge black history and the contribution that black people have done to the world.
Yeah, I love that. And I also just love the doodles as well. Like, I just love every, do you know, and they're not only during Black History Month as well, they're literally throughout the year.
I mean, to add to that, we made a conscious effort actually this year, and like what you said, it's been a horrible year, it's been a bad year, and I think we've made a conscious effort to literally celebrate and just be more. If you realise, I think we dropped 2 doodles within a month, which normally it's either 1 doodle, but we actually went ahead and dropped 2 doodles. So.
Yeah, I love that. And I guess on this topic, Ria, how do we continue to celebrate Black History Month, black creators, just black people throughout the year? How do we make it more than just something we do in October?
Yeah, I think it's a great start to push things out with Black History Month. We get the visibility, we get the momentum built, and we get to see the allies that want to be involved in, you know, this initiative and making sure Black voices are heard and so forth. And then just, I guess, getting the right leaders in the room, getting the right conversations going, the right voices in the room to say what is required by every organisation. Every organisation is structured a bit differently, and so the way that, you know, the Black people within their workforce may be a bit different. So having those conversations with employees and so forth, where they can speak openly, as well as pushing that out to leadership so that there is actually buy-in from the senior stakeholders, and we can actually make those changes, build in frameworks that last for the entire year and that get revisited, you know, on an annual basis, biannual basis, to make sure that we're meeting those goals and getting those voices heard and putting in these initiatives.
Yeah, and like you said, an important part of that is ensuring that there are senior people who will support the initiatives and push the initiatives, but there's also an issue of there not being enough Black people in senior positions in the first place to probably, like, you know, greenlight a lot of these initiatives. So I guess my next question is, I'm going to come back to you because you raised the point so perfectly, is that what are the barriers to Black people being in those senior positions, and how can we support people who want to reach those positions so they are able to, you know, continue this sort of work?
Yeah, so I'll speak from my perspective at least. I feel like it's not just one barrier. There are, you know, a magnitude of different issues or walls that Black people may face that others may not face. And I think possibly just, I guess from the point of view of if we currently have, you know, an issue within that remit, and we currently have senior stakeholders that aren't reflecting, you know, the Black community, then when the decisions are being made by those senior stakeholders, it's more likely to encompass someone that looks a bit more like them or fits in their kind of demographic. Just, you know, maybe not even purposely, we have unconscious bias, there are different versions of this. And so it's kind of, I think it's an organizational responsibility to analyze that, to like actually go into the granular level details and find out what the issue is, not just from the people in their room, but also start opening up the rooms and safe spaces for others to be able to, you know, tell their story and analyze from a detailed level what is actually preventing them and what barriers they may be facing, and try and alleviate those and put in regular reviews so that this can be a continuous kind of action rather than just, you know, a stopping point and something that's a quick win. You know, it's from that kind of endurance and continuous push for change that we actually get the change that we want. Yeah. That's what I'd say.
Pascal, you were nodding along there, doing the What have you in your experiences of like diversity in those levels?
So I agree with when you were saying one of the points that was raised was having to deal with unconscious bias as well. And when you're at senior level, as well as having to act against a stereotype, you've got that in mind as well. So I feel like the challenges at a senior level is making sure that the decisions reflected does reflect the entire workforce and the business as well. And you don't want it to just be subjected to just one area. And an example of that is, you know, at the club we have a diversity group. So if there's anything being put out to the public, you know, it goes through the diversity group first, just to make sure that, you know, the content that's written and the information that's put out is reflective of the club and the community that supports the club as well, which I think is an amazing element to have.
Yeah, and Busi, I know at Google they have the Black Googler Network. For you, why are those kind of employee resource groups important, and what do they kind of bring to the work environment? So
they bring a diversity of thought. So when I actually think of the contributions that the Black Googler Network has done, if I'm looking at from a hiring perspective, if you're talking why there's actually not much Black people in senior positions, it's actually working with our staffing and recruitment teams to actually canvas wider than the net that they're used to. And literally, adding to your points, generically you would actually look at your immediate circles, the people that you know, obviously within your immediate network. And what that does is actually allows you, by partnering up with these employee resource groups, to actually look far afield and actually just have a different perspective.
Yeah. And at TikTok, so the employee resource group for black staff is called BLARC.
BLARC, yes.
I honestly thought that was a typo, but I love it. It's cute. And what's been the kind of impact or the work of the BLARC group here at TikTok?
So going back to your original question, and I'll come back to that. So I would answer your original question that I've always, in my roles, I spent 12 years at Facebook and I've been here at TikTok for nine months. I've always been the most senior black person in the business, right? So it's a bit of a different lens that I see it through because I'm in that position. And one of the things you have to do is to identify the reasons why others don't exist and then create opportunities for those, right? And one of those is an ERG or an employee resources group, because there are challenges that people within our community face. There are things that happen in the day-to-day business that either hold us back either because of the institution or personally because of our experience. And there are certain support networks or support training and education and development paths that need to be specific to the segment in order to bring people forwards and to create those opportunities. So BLARC is a really good opportunity to identify all of those things. The reason why we're here today is because the BLARC community said that Black History Month is a really important thing we need to celebrate, specifically this year. TikTok realised that it was something we needed to do, and we've accelerated that. But as part of BLARC, spinning out of that, there is training and education. We're thinking about our recruiting pipeline. We're thinking about where we recruit, because there's no point in fishing from the same ponds because you're going to get the same people. So how do we fish from different ponds? And then how do we put in things like apprenticeships and recruit people that haven't just got a university background, which is something we're pushing back against? And how do we have apprenticeships or work experience for people that aren't just at university? All of these things are creating entry points for people that are more diverse and from more different backgrounds and experiences to actually come into the organisation. Whereas before it would be recruiting from the same people with the same background, and through homophily, which is association with the same people, you get the same people into your organisation. So BLARC has done a very good way of being able to really break down the existing system to ensure that we are creating entry points for different people to come into our business and be in a position that someone like me is today.
And when race is still seen as almost quite like a divisive topic, how do you then recruit people who may not be black or ethnic minority to help champion those same causes? Because all the things that you're talking about, like, that's a lot of work. That's like everything from like just recruitment to like how the company is run, and it can't only rely on people who are marginalized to do that work.
No, so you have to have the community and you have to have allies. Because nothing gets done really, well, it does get done, it just gets done very, very slowly if you don't have people that are bought into changing the system yourself, right? So there has to be people that are in power, that accept those change and encourage those change, and acceptance that if a company is diverse, then it is better. Right? A company like TikTok, which is developing a platform for 1 billion people and is really diverse, and the content on there is from every spectrum of people, has to have people within the organisation that reflects that as well, right? That just makes us better. If there's not an acceptance of that, then we're not going to be as good as we should be. So hopefully there's that. And then yes, you need to have systems, tools and processes that are supporting our diversity efforts and are encouraging the development of people that don't look like you, and see that as a strength, not as a weakness. And are able to talk about things like race. I mean, talking about race within a corporate environment a few years back would have been a very awkward conversation if it happened at all. Now it is explicitly, you have to talk about it because you need to understand the experience that people are going through because they are a black person or they are a black woman, right? Or they're a black woman who is homosexual. You need to understand those conditions and their experience in order to fix whatever barriers they may have and make them open to be themselves at work, because the only way you're really going to get the best of people is if they can be authentic at work.
Yeah. I see you both nodding along there, Ria. What have been your kind of experiences of talking about race and identity in the workplace, and how do you have those conversations in a way that feels like conducive to change?
Funny enough, we recently created a group called the Race Equality Network at my workplace. And I'll give some background and to say that I'm also the chair of my women's network for UK and Ireland. So this actually, or my involvement in this came about through, kind of understanding the back end processes, working with HR and so forth. So we've created this race equality network. We have weekly meetings to have these kind of open discussions and have that space to discuss the things that you wouldn't be able to, or you wouldn't feel comfortable to bring up on a regular basis with those that you aren't completely sure are allies, and it may just be not a great kind of situation for yourself. Through that, we're also we're having those conversations, we're starting the initiatives. We've started putting on certain events from that group. We recently had an event, I'm trying to remember the name. But yeah, it was about basically about having these conversations and formally inviting those around the business to the round table to say what their experience has been, give them a bit of background and history, and start talking about things like microaggressions, unconscious bias, and so forth. And in the same breath, I'm actually supposed to be running an anti-racism event next week internally to discuss these kind of things. And for example, one of the exercises that we'll be doing is it's an outsider versus insider exercise, and I think that is one of the concepts that really embodies part of the Black experience for me, and it's something that everyone can understand because everyone's at some stage been an outsider. So that idea that you're analysing the time that you've been an outsider in a group or a team, and then analysing the feelings that have come about from that and what effects it's had on what you were doing, the activity, and also going on the other side, analysing it from an insider point of view when you felt like an insider in a different group or team, and then analysing the feelings and the output from that. And so if you think about it in that simple context, if you think about the fact that certain Black people in their workplaces always feel like an outsider. So if you think about the effects and the feelings of always being an outsider, there are impacts of that. Your behaviour is going to be different, and it may be that you want to get on with your day-to-day, but actually based on the fact that you have these feelings and that this is impacting your work, you're not exactly able to, continue in the way that you would have if you were an insider at that point. So I think it's from these kind of conversations, these kind of exercises, that we can really build up the knowledge, but for everyone basically, where people actually would want to support, would want to be allies, but don't know how and don't understand the issue. So I think safe spaces and places to be able to put out those kind of questions and have these kind of discussions are very much key for me.
Yeah, it's really important. And Pascal, in the world of football, how are you recruiting allies to support the work that you're doing for diversity and inclusion?
First things first, we're starting off internally. So I'll go back to the ethnic diversity group that I mentioned earlier. And the great thing about this group, it doesn't just include Black people. It's got people from different ethnicities around the club. And the great thing about this is that they work in other departments. So the stories that are shared within the group is then rippled down and shared with other departments as well. And that breeds the space for incentives where when, let's say, different departments have their team meetings, that the person within the group can also bring up the topics discussed in the team meetings. And the reason why that's a good thing is because the knowledge that's being shared is trickling down to everyone in the club. It's not just staying within that group. So that's a way of just, for starters, putting everyone on the same page. Another way we also do that is reaching out to our communities as well and getting them involved in some of the projects to raise their awareness and to raise their awareness of what's going on within the society and community, so people are on the same page, and also create a space where they can get involved to help should they wish to.
I wonder, is it still important though to have spaces that are only for a certain group? Do you know what I mean?
I think, yes, it is important to have spaces for a specific group. But if you're thinking about change, is it just that group that can make the change?
Yeah.
So if it's just that specific group, what you tend to find happen sometimes is everyone gets together and they start complaining, and everyone's talking about how they're feeling and what they've experienced. But it's not an actual push for change. It turns into more of a, like I said, complaining space. So having different people within that group, okay, you're hearing the words, okay, who's the person who can make this change? Who's the one that can put the actions into plan and actually make them happen? And reaching out to those people and assuring to them with statistics, why this should happen or why a change should start. So that's my reasoning for that.
So I think a lot of this conversation has focused on a kind of huge institutional issues that need to change within companies, but a lot of the, I guess, racism that people face tends to be quite interpersonal. So a lot of it is microaggressions, and those are the things that kind of rest on you very heavy because they are the things you experience directly. So I'd love to know from you guys what sort of microaggressions you've experienced in the workplace and kind of how you've dealt with that. I'm going to start with you because you're just smiling at me. You look wonderful, darling.
As you're looking at me, I was trying to dig up from that well. I guess for me, what's the worst thing about microaggressions is that they're subtle. So at times you don't actually notice that it happened until after the effect. So I think for me, one particular one that stands out actually was a formal dinner, and actually a senior leader turning around and saying to me, "Oh, I did not realize you were very articulate." And at the time, I actually took it as a compliment. I was like, oh, fair and everything. And it's only at home, 3 o'clock in the morning, I mean, when the devil starts to play in your mind and everything. And I woke up, I jolted out of bed, and I thought, what the heck? Hang on a second. Is that what you really meant? So for me, there's been loads of them. And over time, I mean, sometimes you ignore it or you kind of, you keep it inside of you. But it's, yeah, as I was saying, it's just, there's too many, I mean.
Yeah. But like that's important though. Like people always see being called articulate or eloquent as a compliment, but you wouldn't say it to anyone else. And it's so rooted in this idea of like that's actually quite anti-black. That in order for you to be seen as someone who is worthy of conversing with or treating seriously, you have to be a particular way. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I feel like you're itching to say something.
I just think microaggressions exist, and in the corporate world they do. But I don't know if it's just me because I've been in positions of influence for a while now. I just call it out straight away.
As do I.
Yeah, but if you're a position of influence, then of course you feel comfortable to do that.
But I'm saying, so I do that. Allies need to do that now. I'm now in the environment we are in the world we're in the corporate environment we are now. Actually, if someone does that and you call that out, that actually has far more impact than it has ever been before. Right, if you are, all of a sudden, people are going to be saying stuff, and I think we have the power to call it out and for the power for people to feel bad about it and respond and apologise. Because before it wouldn't, it'd be laughed off, it'd be banter, I'm just having a joke. I don't think people can get away with that anymore. I don't think they can say stuff like that, and you say to them, actually I find that offensive, and you call them out. They're not going to say, oh, it's banter anymore. They're going to apologise, and they're going to take that as a learning moment. Or someone, hopefully, an ally, who's an active ally, they'll hear it and they'll actually do it on your behalf, which is what the responsibility of everyone else has to be. So yeah, up until now, microaggressions have been horrendous, and they can make people feel really, really bad. And I've seen even worse so when it comes to women of colour, the microaggressions that are thrown at that segment over the years. But I think now, more than ever, we have to take a stand and call it out when it happens, question it, and then if you're an ally, be active and call it out at that time as well. But yeah, they are devastating. I'm sure you've got examples.
I was going to add to that, sorry, to Trevor, what you're saying, because actually when I think back early in my career, you have this fear of not speaking out because it's your job on the side, it's your job obviously on the line. You don't want to piss off the manager. But actually, as I've progressed in my career and become more senior, I do call it out now, because actually then I do recognise it, and then you obviously have the code of conduct that you can rely on allies as well. But I think there's kind of that balance. If you're on the junior end of the scale, you kind of worry, but then on the senior end of the scale, then it's, hey, let's have a conversation about what you just said.
So every corporation has to create an environment where you can call that stuff out in the culture. Now, regardless if you're senior or junior, I know that's an aspiration, but I think we're in a world where that has to happen, and I pray it does, and we have allies on our side to do that, right? Never before has that been the case, I don't think.
So no, I see both sides of the coin, and I think, I think we've gotten we're now in a space where we can have these discussions. It's quite possible that even this discussion wouldn't be taking place without the recent events. I do think there are certain privileges afforded to certain places of seniority, and I believe that certain people in certain positions it's not easy to call things out. I've seen it firsthand. I've seen certain things, not particularly at my workplace, but things since, the recent events. So for me, I feel as though it can't be the responsibility of every individual to call out issues where, where they are the victim. I think if you have that capability, if you have that power, if you have that influence, then I think, it's completely up to the individual to be able to do that. And I'm glad you're able to do that, Trevor, because it would make a difference to quite a lot of people, around you as well. And I think if you can't, you're not to be judged either. You're going through your own journey, you're going through your own experiences, and there may be certain consequences to those actions for you, or it may just be a bit traumatizing, you don't exactly want to always live your PTSD, for example. But I think just being able to have these conversations is where the difference lies. I think there are more allies than we've ever had, and having these conversations allows for more allies to be involved. And sorry, to your point about there being, the intersectionality of black females and that experience as well. Honestly, I've actually even written an article that's been published by my company with my colleague Titilope. Sorry, throwing that in there. But no,
shout out.
Yeah. But on it's titled Why Black Hair is a Workplace Issue. And of course, all black, the whole black community experiences different issues in this space. But the microaggression of, for example, coming into work and having, me coming in with my faux locks on one day and then another day coming in with a slicked hair bun and being told, oh, you look neat for work now. Yeah, those kind of things. Honestly, through doing this article even, the horror stories of previous experiences, it's ridiculous. But yeah, circling back, because
that's all right.
Tangents. But no, I think it is really important to accept that it's not the victim's job to educate you. It's not the victim's job to make sure that that what you've said isn't right, but it will be helpful if you can do that. But also, again, yeah, as you said, we need to call on allies to also, call these things out, but actually, at times they don't even realize that they're doing it. Yeah, so it's there has to be some form of introspection to be able to check in with yourself, to check whether you actually are saying something that could be seen as a bit, problematic for another individual. And again, it falls back to that outsider-insider thing for me. Taking that moment to step back and look around and say, okay, is someone actually an outsider in this group? And if they are, can I do anything to help that and change that, and bring them inside? So yeah.
And what have your experiences been?
I love the idea of having allies, and I feel that comes with being educated first and having that introspection and education to know, actually, hold on, this is not right. And so to build on that point, I had an experience where I drove into my destination, and the person was like, "Oh, that's a nice car. Where did you get it from? Did you steal it? Oh, we should call the police and get it searched." And and for him, it was coming off as banter, and he really believed that it was banter. And I laughed it off for a minutes, and I drove off and carried on doing what I was doing. But then that evening, it was literally just rolling in my mind. And I thought, actually, do you know what? As soon as I felt a certain way, for me personally, I had to say something. And the reason why I felt like I had to say it is because it may come across as banter for him, and he might not intentionally mean anything by it, but if nothing is said, he would continue with that behaviour and think it's fair and it's right. And someone else might experience, go through the same thing and take it in a different way. It might be traumatic for them. So, and how I called it out, I just messaged him. I said, listen, what was said the other day, what did you mean by it? So I first tried to understand if he first knew that there was a problem for it, with what he said, sorry, and understand why he said it. And then I came on, And then followed up with how I felt about it and the impact that had on me. And he was so like stunned and unapologetic to the point where he even followed it. This was on a Friday. The thought followed him and stayed with him throughout the weekend. He even messaged me again on Monday to the point where he's making you feel guilty for calling it out.
Let's talk about it. Let's talk about it.
For calling it out. And it's like, I'm like, listen, it's cool. Like, I wasn't offended by it, but just be mindful. You know, you have to be just mindful of what you're saying, and if we're going back to allies, if there's people around who are switched on and actually, do you know what, that's not really a cool thing to say, then pulling someone over to the side and just having that discussion, it's a start for an amazing change.
But I was going to say, Pascal, to your point, I love what you said about education, and when you were talking obviously about allies, what if you've been gaslit? Because we talk about not speaking up, and you're right, it's not your fault if you don't speak up, but sometimes if you actually broach the subject with a person and they gaslight you to say, what are you talking about? You're just joking, you're just being emotional. How do you deal with that? Whose onus is it to actually educate the person and say, hang on a second, I know you're looking at this lightly, but let's have a conversation.
That's an interesting question to ask. And, you know, as much as you want to try and, you know, educate somebody in a situation, you can't feed them the knowledge. It's up to them whether they'll take it in or not. And in an instance like that, in an instance like that, for example, you're in control of your own reactions and how you think and how you feel about a situation. So rather than trying to force change upon someone else, how are you going to navigate and move past that situation? Again, it's a bit hard to say not being in that situation. It is a difficult question, but I'm not going to say that it doesn't happen. There is instances where you will try and pull someone to the side and say, actually, do you know what you said is wrong? Like, no, what are you talking about? Like, I was fine. And then, yeah, it's like, what do you do in that instance? It's a good question.
There's a lot there. There's a lot there to unpack. Because there's the whole thing about like white fragility, right? And the whole reason why people fear calling out microaggressions they experience is because white people are so fragile that trying to educate them is you trying to attack them, essentially, because if all you've known is what you're doing is right, then there's that. And then there's this whole idea of like a lot of the racism that we experience in Britain, it being kind of clouded up in like, oh, it's just a joke, or it's banter, or it's just the way we are, or it's politeness. Do you know what I mean? Then it becomes really difficult to dissect those things when it's just a joke, or that's just like British attitudes for you. So like that's also really difficult. But it's just like incredibly layered. And like hearing your stories, it's so upsetting. Like nobody should be made to feel like that where they work, where you give up your time and your labor. And then the whole idea of being like gaslit and then people not even acknowledging that an issue's there. Like, what do you do in the circumstance where someone refuses to even like acknowledge your reality? Like what do you do?
I think it says a lot about that person if they're not looking to acknowledge your reality, and rather than trying to change them, I just kind of navigate around them. So, okay, I understand now what this person's like. So I'm no longer surprised by what they say and what they do, and I don't take it personally because I've got a very strong sense of a very strong idea of what this person is like. So I'm not surprised by their behaviour, and that kind of just helps me keep going and keep moving forward and still striving.
But throwing something controversial, and not to go off tangent because I know you're driving this, is talking about this gaslighting thing. It happens, and I've seen instances where people say, do you know what, it didn't happen, and kind of ignore it. But then it takes something as horrible as George Floyd, and then the stories of black people, the experiences, what we go through at work, for someone then to come to you probably years later, months later, and say, oh, do you know that thing? I actually felt, why do we have to have something as gruesome as that for you to actually twig and say, hang on a second, that was wrong in the first place?
Yeah. Sorry, I was just going to say, like, in addition to what was just said, yeah, I guess bringing it back to my initial point of, it's not always easy or in the benefit of the victim to actually address the issue, because if they're being gaslighted and that person, for instance, is a manager who's doing their performance reviews, and that's the only person that has the final word on what they're doing, then that could easily, and I've seen a lot of this actually, even within the last year, that's the end of their job. So,
no way.
Well, to be honest, yeah, it may not be done so, obviously, But it's that, and then some sequences shortly after, and then somehow they're out of the job. So
That's more than the individual. That's a cultural thing.
yeah, that's exactly. It's an organisational
You're working in
issue.
an environment where that can happen one-on-one, then you're working in an environment where the culture isn't.
Yeah, do you really want to be in an environment like that?
The thing is, not everyone has a choice, I find, and also not even, it's not, okay, sometimes it may be completely the organisational practice, but sometimes there are just some bad eggs within the practice that don't get picked up. And my issue is that it's not always so straightforward to catch this.
True.
And there are so many people that are affected by this and are in this position. And I see this as more of a norm for, junior associates and junior people than not, actually. And this is consistently the fear running through their heads. So this is why I try and stay a bit, open-minded when it comes to these things, because I know, even if I'm not experiencing this, I know that someone else could easily be, and I feel like it's all of our jobs to try and change this across the board, even for those that are not experiencing the same things as us, Yeah. It's the general kind of change and societal change that we need, so that this isn't a norm, this isn't a normal practice. Organisations can't continue like this. They need to address the change, basically.
Yeah. And you mentioned it being an issue about culture as opposed to individuals. And Brucey, you brought up the idea of gaslighting. And these are things that are not necessarily material things. So how do you implement policies that address things like gaslighting or just toxic cultures that are hostile for staff if they're not?
Yeah, you have to, within the company,
measure?
you have to make sure everyone feels like they are responsible for maintaining and retaining the culture that they want to exist in their workspace, for starters, that they calling out bad behaviour where they see it. So if a man sees another man talking in a way to a woman, then that man becomes an ally and actively corrects that. And if everyone feels that responsibility, then all of a sudden things change very, very quickly, and you can have that open and transparent conversation. You have your ERGs that you can go to raise issues and have conversations. People always ask, after the George Floyd thing and the Black Lives Matter protests, where everyone went on the streets and everyone changed their profile, their photos to black, it's like, okay, what's next? What's next is that you can start doing those little things, right? You can start calling out those actions as and when they happen. That's the biggest thing you can do. I wrote this piece which is about how the George Floyd stuff is really bad, and it is. It's horrendous, but actually we don't experience that every day. What we do experience every single day is there was the thing with the woman who was in Central Park who was walking her dog, and the guy said, put the lead on, and she knew that she had power. She rang the police and said, there's a guy attacking me, right? That is what we experience every single day, where people know that they have power over us because of the perception in society. Calling little stuff out like that, which happens every day, is what people need to do, whether you're in our community or out of our community. It's that. That is the stuff you can do next. It's not changing your profile photo. It's not marching down Parliament. It's changing your behaviour and calling out stuff when it happens to ensure that culture within your corporate culture or in society is changing, and behaviours are being called out by more than just us.
Yeah.
Right? And that's all of a sudden, that's where it becomes really powerful. When people say, what is it we can do? It's like be an active ally. When you see it, call it out, because that's how you can help and that's how you can change.
Yeah, I guess the stuff with George Floyd, though, that was like more about kind of police brutality, and then everything that came out after that was kind of a trickle effect. We saw in the music industry there was the whole like Blackout Tuesday. So every industry has kind of taken the energy that was in those kind of protests and relayed it in a way that worked for them. So in its own way.
What was the action though? I mean, what is the people doing? Big things are great, but what is it you're doing day to day that can actually drive actual change in people's lives? It's doing that stuff.
It's talking about company policy that ensures that people don't work in a hostile environment, and protesting against police brutality and the increasing level of like state power people have essentially to like kill people is like a very different issue. Do you know what I mean?
But they're part of the same thing. But the thing is, people get obsessed by the big stuff but forget about the little stuff. So yes, be angry about the big stuff. And we should do, but the big stuff should mean that we are more focused on the lots of little as opposed to the big stuff. Does that make sense? It's like the George Floyd stuff has to happen to focus people, and then people are like, okay, what can I do? It's like, well, there's this big thing happens, but actually there's lots of little things that you can happen that are related to that. You can't change that because that's one, but you can change this lots of little daily stuff, And that's what you should be doing. Because off the back of that, people came home, they marched, they sat on their sofa like, okay, what do I do next? It's like, well, you just marched Parliament. Okay, what you can do is the day-to-day stuff.
Yeah.
Those two things are interlinked because one sparks the other. But you need to focus on the little stuff, really, and that's the stuff that changes culture and changes how people act and behave.
And with the day-to-day stuff, like we were discussing literally before we went live, like that tends to fall on black staff or marginalised people to carry out that work all the time.
It has to be allies too now. It has to be anyone that wants to create an environment where this isn't happening. They have to have responsibility for curating and enforcing that environment and calling it out when it happens.
Yeah. And then on this topic of allyship then, how do we create boundaries of allyship? How do allies assist us and not necessarily lead the movement? Because I think it's so good to call on people to help you, but then sometimes when allies become like emboldened by that guilt, they often take up more space than is required of them. So
the white saviour complex.
Yeah, exactly. How do we prevent that in essentially in corporate spaces?
So I did an interesting training actually that said you can't call yourself an ally. Actually, you have to be invited as well. So I can't literally wake up today and say, hey, I'm an ally. I have to actually be invited by that said group. And you are right that literally it gets to a point where sometimes it's overbearing or what I call taking up too much space. And having that kind of savior mentality, which then I kind of then question your intent, whether it's in a good place or are you trying to do this to kind of hide some guilt or something. And I think, to be honest with you, it's having those conversations with people, like obviously you have to have boundaries, but having conversations and saying, yo, what you're doing there, this is how it's showing up and this is how you're looking. What do you think? And actually I think it's having those open conversations.
Yeah. What are you, yeah?
Yeah, no, I'd agree. I think it's through, going back to safe spaces, having those conversations. And I know previously we were discussing having, like, whether we have the group of people that are actually, the oppressed in the scenario or the oppressed and the allies. And from what I'm seeing more recently, it might be useful to have both, actually, to have where the oppressed can air their stories without feeling any kind of judgment or without feeling they can offend anyone, but also have that, discussion with allies and them involved and, making those changes. So, sorry, actually, no, you know what? I forgot.
We were talking about how how allies can take up a reasonable amount of space that doesn't. No, sorry, going back. No, I think it's through regular reviews and scheduling in those reviews. So once we have that as a kind of a norm to say, okay, well, how's this working for us? Like, is this group discussion actually benefiting us? Do we feel that someone is a bit more weighted in responsibility than another person that should have more responsibility or should have more of a voice? Like, having that consistent review to say, okay, we've created this initiative, we've started the movement, but how's that actually going? And opening that space to have that conversation and change things if they need to be. If there's someone that is an ally that's taking a bit more space than they should be, based on what we're trying to achieve, then that needs to be addressed. But it needs to be addressed in a way that it's almost routine from my experience, so that it doesn't become a problematic, okay, I have to push for this conversation to happen. I have to call them out for this to be changed, kind of thing. Yeah. So, yeah.
So Reggie Butler, who, by the way, I love, is a coach from the US, actually said there's 3 different types of allies, if I can actual allyship. And to your point, like having those conversations, there's people, I want you to just do the work and don't bother me. So don't come to me for help, don't show me what you're doing. And there's other 2 as well, you can find it on LinkedIn. And I guess, as you were talking, like having that conversation is actually broaching that and saying, you act, how you doing this is how I prefer for you to do this because of X, Y, Z. So I just wanted to add some kind of colour to that. That it's not just a case of, I don't like what you're doing, but actually your type of allyship, this is the type of allyship that I prefer.
Yeah. But even that, like trying to get allies to do the right thing is still more labour. Like it doesn't actually take away from the amount of labour that is required
But
for
then the
monarchists to do
emotion
work.
that comes from you getting frustrated. So what would you have? Would you rather actually talk about it and get out the way, or actually sit there and simmer and watch someone walk down that cul-de-sac, as I was saying in the West Indian, and actually then you get irate and you get pissed off? What do you do?
You look like you're going to say something. No.
No, I mean, it's not up to, if you're being a good ally, there's no investment from the community into that. So for instance, if you're in a meeting and men talk over women, right, a lot in meetings, I course correct that. I say, just stop the guy from talking over the woman, right? Just say, just let her finish. That's a small thing, but it's an impactful thing,
massive.
right? And that's not the investment from the woman asking me to do that. I'm taking responsibility because I'm seeing some behaviour that is not right and calling that out and course correcting that. That doesn't take any investment from the community to tell me to be an active ally. I've just seen that, and it doesn't happen on a daily basis. I mean, you're not walking around being an ally, right? You're not walking around saying, how can I be an ally? And then having a Superman thing and saying ally and getting into this. I mean, we're talking these things are very, 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 very rare, but you just need to, when it happens, just course correct it and just call it out. And those little things, it's amazing how just the little things like that just cascade up to into change, right? It stops the microaggressions, maybe, or at least makes people think about it. It creates a culture where people think about what they say, or they course correct someone, or if someone says something, you say, "Oh, you shouldn't have said that," and that person says, "Oh, I'm sorry," and they apologise for it. I mean, that's where we need to be, and it's not a massive thing. It's lots of little things that we should. It's just people being more conscious of stuff, really, and we've just not had that before. People have never been conscious of our experience. And what has happened this year is that all of a sudden people are like, oh shit, oh sorry, oh yeah.
You're communist.
that people are being killed by police. Like all of a sudden there's this realisation this year, right? And we need to just like follow up on that. But that's what I'm gonna say.
So again, following from your point actually, people being conscious, it helps in a club like Arsenal where one of their values is be together. You know, so in a situation like that, you know, when you're brought into the club, everyone, the values are instilled inside you. So when you're thinking of being together, just being together as a community, and you know, allyship is, you know, if you see something, of course you speak up about it, and that just embodies and just keeps the value of the club going forward. What I have found, because obviously football is slightly different, it's not as corporate. My previous role, which was very corporate, I was lucky to be in a venue where it was completely diverse. We had people across the globe working in that venue, and it's funny that these conversations didn't even need to be had because people just say what's on their mind straight away. Oh, sorry, my bad, no problem, issue solved, and just carry on going your day, carry on with your day. So I feel like it's very important to have a diverse culture, because diverse work unit, because you're forced to change the culture. Because it has to appeal to everyone that's there, and everyone has to be comfortable enough to be themselves. And I feel like having a more diverse workforce just breathes space for that mindset and that being together.
But yeah, that's what.
Trevor, you said something which was, my brain is tickling here, about obviously there's not much text on the kind of us to actually educate, but in your position as a male, as a black male, you know our experiences. You understand the experiences of black people compared to somebody from a majority group. So I think there's still that kind of sometimes, and I'm not saying that we have to take it upon ourselves, it's easier for you to call it out in that instance because you notice it, and maybe you might even call it out to a white woman. But I'm thinking in situations whereby there's no one that actually identifies like me, that understands my struggles or my journey, it's a bit...
No, yeah, that's true. And we need to tell our stories, and we need to, particularly when it comes to microaggressions, because microaggressions are so small and but they're big things. But people know what people know. People know. The people know.
Maybe no.
Right?
Maybe no.
People know. You know what I mean? You know what I'm talking about, right?
I can see that look. I can see that look.
They're not thinking, oh, this black woman or this black guy's gone through his life and it's all been good, and yeah, people haven't said bad things. I mean, they know. It's just the small things that maybe they need to course correct themselves. But we can tell our story, but they know.
Yeah.
I find as well. I find that when those small things, I find that when those small things are corrected and called out, it's that. But then it really does create a breath of fresh. Okay, do you know, you can say it, and it's cool. Like, it's okay. I feel like after that initial friction has been, you know, addressed, for me personally, I think it creates a space for more of an open relationship, because you feel more comfortable to just say and be yourself without being judged. And if someone says anything or does something that's not correct, you feel comfortable to go up to that person because you've done it before and it was taken in a positive light.
Yeah.
So I feel if it's not, as well, it's all well and done. You're saying, yeah, let's all be together. But if something happens and no one says anything, there will never be change. There will never be any type of incentive to make anything happen that's different to what we already have now.
Yeah. I've got so many questions to ask, but the time. So what I do have to ask all of you is, do you feel like you can be your authentic selves at work? I'm going to start with you. We're just going to go around.
I bring the authentic self that I want to bring to work. Yes, if that makes sense. I mean, I can't bring I can't bring my full self to work. No, but I bring the self that I'm comfortable to work. Yes, for sure.
Okay. Should you be able to bring your full self to work?
Yeah. I think you should be able to bring the self that you want to bring to work and be comfortable in that. It's when people want to be something in work and feel like they can't be. Right?
Okay.
But there's me and there's professional me, and they're very different people. But I bring professional me, and I'm very comfortable with professional me and all that stuff at work.
Yeah.
But yes.
I might need to rewind that question because I was listening to him and that was
Do you feel like you can bring your authentic self to work?
Yes, but not fully. I guess, again, it's all that perception, how people are viewing it. I mean, I can't come into work with a do-rag and everything. If I'm going to have a meeting with the president, just because it's part of my culture. But I think it's within reason and just being aware of the spaces that I walk in. Don't get me wrong, there are places at Time and Google I've actually walked in just raggle, just myself. But within my immediate circles. But then, obviously, within leadership, it's a different type of self.
Yeah.
So I would say originally I wasn't sure. I had to question it. I had to doubt myself first. But actually there was a kind of mental push for myself just to say, okay, well, why wouldn't I? Which actually resulted in me wearing rainbow braids to work. Okay. So I went the full mile. But no, I think the fact that it is still a question in my head before making that decision, I think that's something I want to work on changing for not only myself, but the community in general, because I think I'm in a lucky enough position for that not to negatively impact me, or for the possible impact to be, you know, balanced by, you know, completing certain actions or making sure that I have the right allies and the right people on my side. I don't think everyone's as lucky. I'd like everyone to be as lucky, and yeah, I want to work on changing that. But I will continue to wear my faux locks and my rainbow braids. Yeah, to work.
My story is quite interesting because my first professional role that I got into, I was actually the only black person in the company, and it wasn't in London. So not only am I dealing with being the only black person in the company, but also the culture is different where I was. So I thought I could be my authentic self, and coming in, hey, what's going on, what's good, and that did not work at all. Did not work at all. And what I realized and what I learned is that's why they say, you know, I'm sure everyone's heard the term act professional. It's not yourself, it's an act, and you know, you have to learn the environment you're in, and to some degree put on a face to suit that environment. What would be great is that if that face that you put on isn't so far from your own identity, where you can still bring in your own, come with your own identity in a professional manner, and it's not criticised and it's not judged. So going forward now, am I able to be my authentic self? The authentic self, yes, I would say so, because of the character I've had to learn with my professional self. As Trevor was saying, there's yourself and there's your professional self. So I've had to learn and build that professional self, and it's something simple as even communicating. You know, with my friends, I may speak with them a different way. However, someone at work, a colleague at work, I can't speak to them the same way. I wouldn't necessarily say it's culture. It's just more about an understanding. How I communicate my point across to this person will be very different to how I say it to somebody else, whether they're in the same team or for the same background. So again, it's understanding the environment you're in and understanding that there's different forms of communication that you can do and still be yourself. But it's just learning that as a skill.
Yeah. It's weird. I think like professionalism is so based in like respectability politics. So it's like, even if you are bringing a version of yourself that is like matching your environment, it's still not technically yourself, and it's still going to be very different to who you actually are, because we operate in a world that says this is professional, this is unprofessional, and it's why black hair is so political, right?
Yeah.
And I remember my first ever it's so bad, but like my first ever like internship I did at the Bank of England when I like fresh out of like sixth form, and I had a wig and it had like green tips, and I thought it was so cute. I thought I was that girl, and I came in and my manager was yelling at me, like, and it was the first time that I was like, oh my god, like this is like I didn't know that the world of work was like this, and it definitely did change my perception of like kind of what I wanted to do. Like there was no way I was going to work in banking, but like it changed a lot for me, but it then made me realize that my identity, the way I look, the way I express myself is inherently political in a predominantly white space. So
I actually, if I could just follow that up by saying, like, there's a difference between professionalism and, I guess, non-black professionalism. And I'd say, buzzword, code switching. But it could very easily be, and actually this point was actually in my article, that you wore your wig with your green tips, and actually a colleague, same manager, same level of seniority, actually had their hair green, but because they're of the non-black race, actually, like, there wasn't a problem, there wasn't an issue with that. And that's where the issue lies, more so in the difference between that, rather than, okay, you just shouldn't be wearing green tips to work. The issue is actually, okay, well, if they can have actual green hair, what's wrong with my wig with my green tips? Because actually you don't seem to have a problem with the colour. I think it's more of that conversation, but yeah.
It's really interesting because this actually leads to my next question. I'm not just rambling about my life. But like when I actually went into work, I saw the governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, and he was like, I really like your hair, it's cool. And I was like, oh my God, the governor of the Bank of England likes my hair. And then my manager, who was a woman, was yelling at me. And so the question I want to ask you guys is, how do we acknowledge issues or microaggressions that are within our own community? Because not all skin folk are kinfolk, right? So you're going to have to deal with people who look like you, essentially being agents of the same forces that are trying to make your experiences hostile. And I don't think it's an easy conversation to have, because I know we like to talk and ramp up solidarity, but actually there are people within the movement who will actively work against it. So how do you deal with that in professional spaces? Oof. I would love to know, because me, I'm like, what?
That's deep.
It is, yeah.
Sorry to end on that note.
The only way you can do it is by, the culture has to exist where their actions are seen as pushing against that culture. That's a difficult conversation to have. I can see it, and I've probably had it at a conversation, but that's tough.
I can give an example of it, which was shared with me the other day by a friend. You're in the changing rooms, and football changing room brands that can be brutal. Just for example, you have two black players in the changing room with their white counterparts, and the black player, one of them is getting all the banter, and to kind of put the light away from him, he would then attack another black colleague or black player to kind of shift the banter towards him, and that becomes a norm. So he's not the brute of all the brute of the banter all the time, and that's a problem, because if neither of them can actually realise or check themselves to say, actually, what we're doing, we're going against. We're not together at all, then you're just feeding fuel to that problem. So again, how you deal with it, I think speak out, call it as it is.
Yeah.
But you have to be mindful of what you're doing in the first place to call it. So it starts from then educating yourself, and again, just being aware of your surroundings and just know what you're doing, which would be quite surprising, because some people just don't even have the mindset or to know what they're doing.
I'm in agreement with these guys, but some of it is beyond repair, and you need to know which battles to pick.
That's the thing.
That's a word right there,
That's.
Yeah,
exhausting.
No, what can I say that hasn't been said? I think in the same way, there are certain, issues that lie in other races, and, our fight against, being black in the workplace. I think in the same way we have to look at that and try to call it out if you can and try to get those conversations going. It needs to be a conversational piece to address those that may be of the same community as us that aren't actually working towards or actually are toxic to our environment or what we're trying to do. I think as everyone has proved, like it's a very difficult one because they are part of the community. So especially if you're in a corporate environment where there aren't a lot of black people at the top, and that there may be someone that is against you of the black community that is in that position, it's very difficult to try to get everyone's views to understand that that person is not for the same things that we're for, kind of thing. I don't have a full answer, but I go back to making sure there's those discussions, regular reviews, and trying to formalize it in some sort of framework so that we can point these out where there are issues. But it is I want everyone to have this conversation, basically. I want everyone to put their input in because we all need to figure out how to navigate around this. And I love the fact that we're having these conversations now. I think it's through these conversations and understanding that we'll be able to find remediation to having these kind of issues.
Yeah, I mean, I've got so many hot takes on that, but we can talk about that off air. But for now, thank you. You've all been so amazing. This has been a really interesting conversation beyond the kind of diversity and inclusion cliches. I feel like people can actually take stuff away from this. And I mean, I'm not even in that world anymore, but I feel like I've learned a lot about what's going on and what you're doing to kind of combat it. So thank you. And thank you to everyone at home watching. I hope you've enjoyed this discussion. Please enjoy our Black History Month campaign video, My Roots, and join us on the 23rd for a panel that is all about gaming. Good night.